Hi, my name is Aaron McManus, and you're listening to the Battle Ready podcast. If this is your first time listening or watching, this is a bit of a different week. We said it in the last episode, but my dad and I are traveling in different places, and we're just getting back to LA, so we thought we'd do something a little bit different. This week, we're going to play an archived episode. Why this is interesting, and I'll give a little bit of the backstory here. When we started Battle Ready, I was in an interesting place. I was starting a new campus called Mosaic Venice in Santa Monica, which is the next city over from Venice, but it's where we could find a venue. And I was really nervous to speak, really hesitant, really insecure, trying to figure out my voice, trying to figure out if I could even do any of this. And so I asked my dad if he would be willing to start a podcast. And so he had written a book the year before called The Last Arrow. And in this book, he kind of logs and tells the story of what it was like fighting cancer and battling cancer. He was diagnosed around the same time he was finished writing the book, and then he adds a chapter called Battle Ready. I had told him that if he were to pass in this fight with cancer, there were so many questions I still had for him. So we decided to start this podcast where essentially it was me asking him questions about God, about humanity, about life, asking the questions that people are afraid to ask. And in the time where I wasn't sure if I would lose my dad, it was really special for us to document this and to show the world kind of this conversation relationship that we have. It is now evolved into something completely different. And I don't know if it's different, but it's just grown so much. And there's so many people around the world that are listening each and every week, every Tuesday and Friday to the Battle Ready podcast. It's really something so special to us. So lean into this podcast. It is episode 1 in 2017. I'm not even sure what I say. It's titled How to Think. And what I love about our podcast and the mission and the vision of what we set out to do is to ask big questions, ask the hard questions, and to leave everything on the table, even if it puts us in an awkward place, even if we fight a little bit. I was probably, how old would I have been? I would have been 28. So yes, late bloomer, but check out this podcast, check out this episode. And for everyone who's new to the Battle Ready family, this is where it all began. 3 years ago, the Battle Ready podcast. Here we go.
Hey guys, this is Erwin McManus, and I am here with our new podcast with my co-host, Aaron McManus. Aaron, say hi.
Hi.
He is really, really verbal, and so sometimes we have to just shut him down. But as we get started, Aaron, we have a couple of giveaways today.
Yeah, so for everybody watching on YouTube or the video podcast, and for everybody listening, we're going to give away a copy of The Last Arrow and a copy of Erwin McManus' new book and a copy of Unknown by Mosaic, MSC, our worship band at Mosaic. All you have to do is tag 3 friends in the comment section on Erwin McManus' latest post. We're going to give a book and a record away each day, and we'll DM you for details. We're excited about this. We just want to give and invest into your guys' life and kind of give you a glimpse into what we talk about on the daily basis and all of our conversations. So forgive us, but don't forget us. And this is untitled, unedited, unrehearsed father and son conversation.
All right, and we're talking about what today?
How to think, and more uniquely, how you think, and how different it is, and how unique it is, and how brilliant it is. And I think as young communicators, young people, one of the things that we are always wondering is how do you do what you do? And I know a lot of it is that you always say it's the 30 years of studying, the 30 years of reading. People always want to know, like, what books are you reading? Mm-hmm. And I think around 50, you kind of switched and said, I'm not really reading any more books, except for the few friends that he has, and I'm writing more books. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so cool that like John Gray said, you have 5,000 books inside of your head, and you don't need any of us. And I hope we get 5,000 books out of you. So
thank you.
Today we're talking about what do you think, how do you think, and how to be a young communicator and think differently, diversely, and more uniquely each and every time.
All the different kind of topics we're going to be addressing, whether it's leadership or creativity or culture or church life or just
family.
Living life,
and
family.
maybe we'll just have a fight on here every once in a while.
Yeah. All those things are rooted in the thinking process, how we think.
Right.
And I was mentioning that one of our friends who's a really great communicator sent me a text, and he said, after listening to one of the talks, he said, how can I change how I preach? How can I preach like you preach? And I texted him back and I said, to change how you preach, you have to change how you think.
Wow.
And that's why I want to just dive in. And we may do more than one episode on the podcast on this, because I think this is such an important topic. Because when you're processing information, when you're making decisions, when you're gathering perspective, it affects everything. Whether you're reading the Bible, studying the scriptures, trying to hear what God is saying, or you're trying to understand the political arena. What do you believe about some issues like immigration or the environment or social justice and one of the things that really would frustrate me is a lot of times some of these big TV shows would call me up and ask me to come and give an opinion on their show, but they would want me to hold one extreme position or another extreme position. And when I would share with them my position on an issue, they would literally tell me, we can't really have you in the show because your position is too well thought out.
Right.
And we need someone who has an extreme position. And I think that's part of the problem, is that whether it's in the news, whether it's in the media, we're being bombarded by extreme positions, and we're actually becoming incapable of really complex and thoughtful reasoning. And I want us to have conversations about how to think, not what to think.
Right. I think that's the interesting thing. Even with politics survives and thrives on the polarization of humanity. You can't have everyone gets along. That is quote unquote not democracy, right? That would be socialism or whatever it would be. But actually, Jesus' perspective, not that we really even use that language, but to have a perspective that is fully influenced by Jesus, I think would be to have a perspective that would be above just polarizing one human and another, whether you're gay or straight, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you're good and evil. I think that was the whole point of Jesus, right? Is that he was bringing everyone together kind of inside of the church and having this conversation throughout humanity. And I think that's one of the things you do so uniquely, that we did a series, what is it?
The Truth Between Us?
The Truth Between Us. And even more recently, you used Joshua 1 and talking about the promise. The process is the promise. Mm-hmm. And that if we're not working through all of these issues and actually breaking down all of these things, if we're not breaking new territory, going past and beyond the point of no return, then we're actually not actually going to the promise that God has for us. And I think as believers, so often we stop at that line, because going beyond it and actually thinking in a new way terrifies us so much, because we think that the promise is within the point of no return, but actually the promise is beyond the point of no return.
That's
the
so
point
good.
where God is actually calling us to.
Yeah. And when we think about thinking, a lot of times we think, well, great thinkers are logical. Or great thinkers are intellectual.
Or practical.
Yeah, or great thinkers are imaginative. But I actually think the highest level of thinking is connected to empathy.
Wow.
It's not about your ability to imagine. It's not about your ability to gather data or the depth of your intellect. It's not about your ability to be logical. Your ability to be empathetic, to see things from the other person's perspective, to understand the way they see reality, to be able to step into their space. The more you're capable of getting out of your own subjective space and see life from someone else's vantage point, I'm convinced the better a thinker you actually are. The thinking is like a muscle, and if you don't exercise a muscle, it loses its capacity to have its strength. And, we play basketball together, and I've come to figure out I jump off the wrong leg. I jump like I'm left-handed. I hold the ball like I'm right-handed. My body is confused. and so the art of doing something really simple like a layup is actually really, really hard for me.
But you can shoot threes all day.
That's because my body understands that motion. But that's a perfect example. It's that thinking is like becoming ambidextrous. It's like learning how to use your left hand rather than just your right hand. And so even when I was young, when I first learned about Leonardo da Vinci and I learned that he was ambidextrous and he could use both his right and left hand, I began developing early on the ability to use both hands. And so I was a right-handed passer, so I learned how to throw the football as well left-handed. I played ping pong with right hand, so I learned how to play ping pong with left hand. A lot of people think I did that just to be competitive, but actually it was because I understood that I was actualizing. I was mobilizing a different part of my brain. So it wasn't just about learning how to use my left and my right hand. It wasn't just about learning how to jump off my left or right foot. It was forcing my brain to experience reality from a different place. And it's the same way with looking at the scriptures. Like, let's start there, looking at the Bible. because a lot of the people listening to us are people who really, they build their lives on the truth of the Scriptures. They're followers of Jesus. And yet what happens a lot of times is that we're not actually reading the Bible. We're reading everything we've been told about the Bible.
Right.
So we're superimposing our already preset convictions on a passage of Scriptures. When I grew up playing chess, they would tell me there's two ways of playing the table. You can actually play the pieces on the board, or you can play the pieces in your imagination on the board. And there were really two boards. And a lot of times I would make a mistake on the physical board because I didn't see the board in my imagination properly. I saw the pieces in the wrong places. When we come to the Bible, we don't realize it, but we have all of this stuff that we're bringing to the Bible rather than pulling things out of the Bible. I think one of the reasons I see the Bible differently is that I was a good, solid, pure pagan. And I didn't grow up in church. I didn't grow up with faith. I'd never seen a Bible my entire life.
Right.
I didn't know the story of Moses. I certainly didn't know anything about Elijah. And it was all new. I didn't know who Jesus' disciples were. I didn't know who his crew was. I didn't know who he hung with. And all that was new for me. I didn't know there was 66 books in the Bible. I thought the book of Romans should be back with the book of Kings. And so when I first started reading the Bible, I didn't have anything that I was bringing into the Bible. I didn't have already pre-held beliefs that I needed to validate because of the Bible. So I think some of it is always coming to things as if you are a novice. If you step into something as an expert, your likelihood to learn is diminished dramatically.
Wow.
You have to come in as a beginner. You have to come in with fresh eyes. You have to come in as if you know nothing. And and that's true not just in reading the Bible. It's actually true in every arena of life. But it's also important to see things from the perspectives of everyone else in the room. Like when one time I was doing a talk on Israel being delivered out of Egypt. But one of my friends, Bassem, who was Egyptian, was sitting on the front row. And the moment I started talking about Egypt, I looked at him and I realized I have an Egyptian in the room. He is literally seeing the Bible from Egypt's side, not from Israel's side.
Wow.
And let me tell you, it dramatically affected how I told that story that day.
So how did you tell it differently?
Well, first of all, I had to start looking at it from Egypt's perspective. You have this nation inside of a nation that suddenly has grown so large that they've terrified you. They are threatening what you think is your livelihood. And so instead of connecting that your nation has been blessed because this nation inside of your nation has been blessed, they actually began to enslave them. And you begin to see this whole thing from the other side. And it's true with even like David and Goliath. When we read the Bible, we're always David. We're never Goliath,
Right.
And every devotional is, and this is what you need to learn about being the David.
Right.
Sometimes the truth is you're Goliath. You're actually you're fighting against God.
You're the monster ruining people's lives.
You're the monster that everybody's trying to bring down.
Right.
And you're not Hosea. Who is called to marry Gomer, who's a prostitute. You may be Gomer, who's a prostitute, and you need to believe there's a Hosea out there who will love you as broken as you are.
Wow.
And so a huge part of it for me is, first of all, coming to every passage with no assumptions, coming into it as if I'm ignorant. And I don't know anything. I let the passage speak to me rather than to speak to the passage. The second thing I do is I try to see it from everyone's vantage point and the perspective, to see it both from Hosea and Gomer's side, to see it both from, Peter's side and the Roman who just lost his ear. We're never advocating for that poor Roman guy doing his job.
Yeah.
Just doing what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And he comes and takes Jesus, and he's not even looking in Peter's direction.
He's just doing his job.
But there's no way a fisherman could out-battle a Roman soldier, a warrior trained for battle. So what that means is that this Roman soldier had no idea that this fisherman was going to grab a sword and swing at his head. Right. And, you think Jesus' disciples would respond differently. Right. Can you imagine being that guy, that moment, when that sword just misses your head, takes your ear, and then Jesus reattaches it? I think a huge part of thinking, because this is what we're really talking about, is how to think. The way to think is to try to lay all your preconceived opinions on the table, to realize you do have opinions. You have a perspective. You have stuff you're bringing into every conversation. And to take the time to understand things from the other side, which is true even politically. I mean, I'd always say the problem with our political debate is that Democrats think Republicans are stupid, and Republicans think that Democrats are evil. So you got stupid and evil people trying to have a conversation with each other.
Right. Being stupid and evil.
Yeah, and what's amazing to me is that it doesn't matter what the issue is. The moment it's environmentalism, you have two different extremes. You know, whether it's healthcare. And what's really important is to go, okay, there can be a thoughtful, intelligent, God-loving follower of Jesus who holds the opposite position from you. And you don't fully understand this position until you can see it from their perspective. And by the way, this is true in this arena we call evangelism. You know, I get the joy of seeing so many of my friends come to know Jesus who are atheists and Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims and everything else. And a lot of times people ask me, well, how are you good at this? And it's really simple. I see the world from their eyes, through their eyes. I'm not trying to make them see it from my perspective. I'm trying to see the world from theirs. I mean, the best way to talk to a person is from their world, not from your world. And the more you can understand and empathize from another person's perspective, it allows you to have a more textured, more intelligent way of talking to them. So I think learning how to think is so important. Because it's true in the communication process. Like a lot of great Christian communicators out there, and who are just so compelling and so powerful, but they would not thrive in our space. And a huge reason for that is they begin the conversation. Let's say if there's an A to Z, they begin the conversation at L, or K, or P.
How so? Could you be more specific? So you're talking like how a communicator would already project the fact that the audience he's listening to are already believers. Right. That would be the main issue, right?
Like when you say, when you say, hey, when you walk on stage and go, if you love Jesus, would you just cheer with me? Or if you love the church, would you just, give it up?
Do you feel like in that moment they've already lost the room?
I do. And they didn't lose the room. They won the room that they know how to win, and they lost everyone who doesn't believe. Because you've already asked people to separate themselves. You've asked them to identify themselves as whether they're in or not. Right. And I would never begin like that. In fact, I almost never would end like that. Because to me, it's like I'm talking to all of humanity. I'm not just talking to Christians. I'm not just talking to the church. I'm not talking to people who believe. I'm talking to everyone.
So then you would also get the contrasting statement that Christians wouldn't feel addressed as much inside of Mosaic, or when you preach, even though you so clearly preach from the Bible, from the scriptures, from your past of being a follower of Christ, but you also very much speak to the individual who's furthest from God. And I feel like being your son, hearing both sides, that you talk to the individual who doesn't know God, and you talk to the person who does know God, right? And you're lifting both of them up, and you're trying to bring both of them together.
Absolutely, because here's the thing. There are things that apply to Christians that do not apply to non-Christians.
Like giving?
No. Well, like morality.
Morality, right. Without the context of Christ.
I always think it's interesting that we keep trying to make people without Jesus moral, as if that's what Jesus came to do. I have no expectations of a person who doesn't believe in God, but I have a lot of expectations of you, both as a follower of Christ and as a pastor. But let's say if we say, man, it's so good, it's so good that Jesus saves us. That's a true statement, but only a person who already believes in Jesus would even understand what that means. Okay. So here's a subtle difference. You could say, hey man, it's so good people got saved. Everyone who understands that goes, it's wonderful. Everyone who's not a follower of Christ is going, what does that mean?
What are they saving us from?
Yeah.
And then some people might be even
offended going, what do I need to be saved from? But if you say, man, it's such a beautiful thing that all these people have come into a life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ. You've taken just a little bit more work, but you've explained it so that everyone in the room can understand what you're saying.
Right.
So it's not that the language is wrong, it's limited. And so it actually isolates the room. You ever had a conversation that just uses big words?
Yes.
And they want to use big words so that you don't know what they mean.
Right.
It's because they want to let you know that you are beneath them, outside of them, not one of them.
Right.
And so I love the fact that it was Einstein who said that you don't understand something until you can explain it simply. And I feel the same way with our faith, with the scriptures.
And with young communicators, right?
That's right.
That, if you could say, can you say that again? Because I think that's the thing that every young communicator needs to actually write down on their soul, life, computer, everything they ever write. It should start from the simplest idea, the inception of the idea.
That's right. Well, one is that I go, okay, if it isn't simple, it's because you don't understand it.
Right.
And that's how I can actually tell if a person understands a subject.
Right.
Because if they can't explain it simply, they don't understand it. And you can take complex things, and once you understand them, you can explain them to a 10-year-old. But I say as a communicator, be careful not to become a celebrity by using jargon.
Wow.
Because once you're using jargon, once you're using cliches, and yes, biblical language can be jargon.
Give some examples.
Praise God. It's a true statement.
Yeah.
But it is jargon.
Right.
And in that, it creates an instantaneous response from people who already believe that your actual point may not deserve.
Right.
And because like if I'm having to say, can we thank God for what I just said? The reason you're having to say that is because no one thanked God for what you just said. And, what you say should be profound, not the fact that you just told everybody it was profound.
Right.
I was speaking at this event in Australia, and on the way there, I think it was Melbourne or somewhere, and on the way they said, hey, whenever you give a truth, everyone will just absolutely respond. And so they're saying, we really encourage you to give truths, because people were just absolutely cheer and shout and clap. And I said, so are you saying that every time I say something that everyone already believes, they're going to just shout me down? They go, yes.
Right.
And I said, yeah, that's not really the way it works for me, because I didn't fly across the world to give a message about something everyone already knows. It just wouldn't be worth my time. Because if I'm just going to preach what everyone already knows, just get someone that's 30 minutes away.
Okay.
And I want to unwrap truths that you're not really sure if you even agree yet, but they're disturbing, and they actually destabilize you. And a
lot of Christians have problems with that, right? And we're going a little off topic of what do you think, and maybe into how you think and how you explain this. But no, when you don't preach to just encourage, and I think you don't preach just to educate. You're not just a teacher or an encourager. And I think a lot of preachers, especially, or communicators even now, are just encouragers. Mm-hmm. They just say the things that people already know, so they feel good about themselves. So when they leave and go on, and they feel like this ecstasy of, oh, I feel like I've heard something that I know is so true. But you really do. I know that sometimes people come to Mosaic and they leave shook. Their soul has actually been stirred up so much that it's not just an emotional experience, that they're actually left in a place that maybe is hard for them to get back to on their own. So how do you deal with that? Because what you're doing is just as dangerous. Right.
I want to devastate a person's view of reality.
Right. Because then how do you reshape that reality and bring it to a place where it makes them whole?
Because I think it's the only way that you can actually help a person. No,
but I'm saying, what do you do after that?
Right. 2 weeks ago, we flew across the country, Kim and I.
Hold on. No, I'm asking. I'm asking real quick there. I'm asking real quick.
And right before I spoke, the person said, hey, people here just need to be inspired, not challenged.
Okay.
And I looked at Kim, I said, then why would they bring me?
Right.
And it's true that most of our preaching is focused on inspiring.
Right.
And oftentimes, what inspiring means is to reinforce what people already believe, because then people feel safe when you reinforced what they already believe.
So then how do you say, I didn't answer my question, but how do you say that, what response to churches who are growing rapidly with people who they say are coming to Jesus for the first time, but they're really only preaching on things that they know that they believe, right?
Well, one, I'm so
believe.
excited that people are coming to Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, there's no knock on it.
Yeah.
There's no critique. But how do you explain that, right? Like the person who doesn't know Jesus and they're being brought into maybe one of the most bizarre situations where a bunch of people are talking about things they already know about. How can you explain that?
Okay. Well, I want to go back to your question where you're saying, how do you, after you've devastated a person's view of reality, how do you help a person move to wholeness?
Yeah, because the reason why is because I feel like a lot of people don't always come every week because they actually physically can't take it. Do you know what I mean? Like I think it messes with their core so much that it takes them weeks to process. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think that may be a really good point.
Yeah.
And
it's not a critique. I'm genuinely like.
Yeah, again, I think in images because I think like if you have a broken leg and you don't have it reset, it actually heals wrong. You can never run, and the only way to heal that leg is to break it and reset it. And we want to somehow be healed without having to go through the breaking process, but
so good.
Our souls have been reset improperly.
Wow.
And so when we think that, one, we can do life without God, we have to break that bone to reset it.
Wow.
When we think that God is going to make everything okay, and we become embittered with God because he didn't make everything okay, we have to break that bone and reset it. We have to change your view of reality so that you can actually begin to thrive in reality. And and I think that's even just this idea that somehow if you're in the will of God, you're always in a safe place, that bad things won't happen to you if you're in the will of God.
Right.
I mean, I feel like that's one of the bones I had to break.
And this statement has gotten you in a lot of trouble over the years.
20 years ago when I said, being in the center of the will of God is the most dangerous place in the world. And I did not get a great response, because the Christian messaging is when you're in the center of the will of God, you don't die, you don't get hurt, you don't have loss.
And maybe this is a callous statement, but I feel like most Christian churches sell safety.
I agree, and I think
the Bible is so not that. It's selling, taking risks. It's the heroic narrative that you talk about, the Old Testament, Jesus' story.
That's right.
That cross was not a safe place.
And so somehow having faith meant being safe,
right?
Rather than having faith meant being at risk,
right?
And what happened to our language somewhere along the way? And, I mean, here's the thing.
And you talk, and real quick, you talk about that in the Barbarian Way so much. When did we become so civilized? When did we become so
domesticated?
So domesticated.
Yeah.
When did we lose the Barbarian way of our roots? And how? And I think that's the brilliance of that book. And if you haven't read that you need to, because that would change your life. That's changed so many people's lives. Yes. Okay.
We're not finished.
We're just out of time. See you tomorrow, next week, soon. I don't know. Come back often?
It's going to be a daily podcast except the days that we don't podcast.
Yeah, a daily podcast except for the days we don't podcast.
See you then.
That's good.
Okay, if you're still listening, I just want to thank you for hanging in there and checking out this first podcast, which I think is really special. It kind of just shows where we've come from and what we've built, but also just what you're a part of as our family with Battle Ready. In this podcast, I think we've come a long way. We're asking bigger questions. We're going deeper. We're less afraid. We're leaving so much more on the table. And I'm really appreciative of every single email, every Instagram DM, every post, every mention, everything you guys do to support us each week. So if you haven't written a review yet, you can go to iTunes, you can write a review and rate the podcast. You can also check us out on Spotify and YouTube. And you can email me at aaron@battlereadypodcast.com. We just did a little bit of a merch drop a couple weeks ago, and I think we're going to do one again before Christmas. So get ready, and we will see you soon. Next Tuesday, the Battle Ready Podcast.